Wow.
Thank you very much. Well, State of the Union.
Yes.
I'll say a couple of words. Well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here. I actually just got back from Munich and Nuremberg and Prague. We've been filming a new movie which deals with some of the topics I'll be talking about tonight. And so interesting to enter a year or two of Trump's America. I mean, it's quite remarkable. After last year's election, I thought that the temperature would cool a little bit
Yes.
in the subsequent months.
Yep.
But it's not happened. And even yesterday, I thought Trump was sort of, not off his game, but he was rather benign. He was a little namby-pamby by the Trumpian standard. And even so, the sheer looks of constipated horror in the audience were so telling.
Yes.
Now, look, I'm a product of a different era. I came of age in the Reagan years, in the 80s. And that was an era of gentleman's politics. If you think of Reagan and Tip O'Neill, they could have an acrimonious political argument, but it was conceivable that they could go out for a Guinness afterward. I don't think they did it, but they could have.
They did.
That's inconceivable now. That's not the America we live in today. So, to those who say that we're living in a divided society, that we are experiencing what one could almost call a fascist moment in American politics, I actually agree. And I think in a sense it's regrettable. It's regrettable. Because, well, think back just to the State of the Union. It is customary at the State of the Union when the president states policy positions that the opposing party disagrees with, not to applaud. But the State of the Union is peppered with what you can call aspirational statements. We want an America that's going to be strong and prosperous and an example to the world. Now, at every State of the Union that I'm familiar with, going all the way back to the late 70s, those evoke thunderous unifying applause. Except now.
Yes.
Except now. Even if Trump says something like, I'd like to make it so that people who are facing terminal illnesses should have a chance to experiment with drugs
Yes.
that might save their lives. Pan over to the audience. Dead silence. Black unemployment is lower than it has been. Black Caucus looks like this is the worst news that they've heard since
Yeah.
slavery.
Yep.
So something is up. Something is really up. And also our policy debate in America has evaporated. So that we're having major issues popping up on the foreign policy front, involving taxation and the court and healthcare. But we actually aren't having debates on any of those issues. There's no real debate. Why? Because American politics has actually been paralyzed, I would say, by two incendiary meteors that have been unleashed since Trump. And these two meteors, which are the subject of my talk tonight, the race card and the fascism card. The race card and the fascism card are interconnected because the fascists were also racists.
Yep.
Not so much Mussolini's fascists, but certainly the Nazis, the National Socialists, were anti-Semites, they were racist, and so the race card and the fascism card are united by a shared commitment to white supremacy. White supremacy.
Yes.
And now, the fascism card is not a new card. I remember even in the Reagan era, people would say, Reagan's a fascist. Bush is a fascist. But they were, you could say, just saying. In other words, they were throwing out an insult. They didn't actually mean it. Nobody, Reagan was just far too whimsical. Well, for anyone to think that Reagan was actually going to say, shut down the New York Times. Or suspend the two-party system, or put his opponents in jail. Nobody thought that. So they were using the word as a kind of throwaway. But with Trump, the left means it. And not only do they mean it, but they are using these accusations, the race card, the fascism card, to legitimize behavior that would otherwise be completely unacceptable. And we've been seeing that behavior really non-stop since the election. I mean, think about this. Starts off with, let's go convince the electors who are committed to Trump to vote against him. And then, let's not go, mainstream Democrats, let's not go to the inauguration. I mean, if Republicans had said, you know what, we're not going to go to Obama's inauguration, this would have caused a national uproar. It's unthinkable for the opposing party not to attend the inauguration. Let's have riots and disrupt the inaugural ceremony and inaugural celebrations. Outrageous. This whole kind of apparatus of investigation. Let's investigate Russia collusion. What's the evidence that there has been Russia collusion? Well, we don't really have any, but we're trying to find out if there has been. We're trying to find out if there was obstruction of justice. Well, normally obstruction of justice involves an underlying crime. If there's no underlying crime, there's nothing to obstruct. If you haven't done anything, and you go to Comey and say, hey, why are you investigating me? I haven't done anything. That's not obstruction of justice. In Watergate, there was an underlying offense.
Yes.
The offense was being covered up. That was the obstruction of justice. So all of this craziness is going on, but of course it's not crazy. Even the stuff on campus, all the stuff with safe spaces, and all the stuff with refuse fascism, and all the stuff with by any means necessary, and even the Antifa protests and obstructions. All of this would be justified if Trump was in fact Hitler circa 1933. Because if the Germans had done these things and stopped Hitler, think of all the carnage that would have been prevented later. So of course the question becomes, are these cards, the race card, the fascism card, are they actually being played fairly? What do they actually even mean?
Yep.
I mean, what's really funny is, I've debated Bill Ayers a few times. He's one of the co-founders of Refuse Fascism. It's really hard to talk to him about fascism because, interestingly, it's a word I don't think he could go through the day without using it. It's a very important word to him. But at the same time, he appears to have no idea what it is. It's kind of funny, really, to have a word that is such a staple of your vocabulary that you use almost like the name of your kid, but you're not sure if it is your kid. You don't really know what you're saying. And now, this is not because Bill Ayers is a dummy.
Well,
It's because the meaning of fascism has been camouflaged. The meaning of fascism has been hidden, so that very intelligent people, very well-read people, can't tell you what it is. If they start telling you what it is, the senselessness of what they're saying becomes immediately apparent. Let me say, I'll talk a little bit about fascism first, and then I'm going to pivot and say something about racism. Trump is a fascist because he is an ultra-nationalist. Well, ultra-nationalism is not actually a core meaning of fascism. Yes, the fascists were ultra-nationalists. But ultra-nationalism, this sort of fanatical devotion to your own country, is commonly found on the left as much as it is on the right. Gandhi was a nationalist, as was Mandela, Fidel Castro, Stalin. Stalin's big slogan was Motherland Russia, socialism in one country. All the anti-colonial leaders, Che Guevara, were fanatical nationalists. So obviously, all these people aren't fascists. Abraham Lincoln was a nationalist. So was Winston Churchill, so was de Gaulle. Nationalism does not actually equal fascism. Trump is a fascist because he's an authoritarian. Now, one of the problems with this kind of equation, and I cannot tell you the epidemic of articles that will say this, Trump is a fascist because he's an authoritarian. This is actually a very difficult type of equation to refute because both sides of the equation are wrong. In other words, Trump is not an authoritarian, and authoritarianism does not equal fascism. So you're making an equation in which both sides of your equation are false. First of all, if Trump was an authoritarian, would he be flayed as he is every day on every conceivable media platform from morning to night? Every comedian, every talk show host, a real authoritarian would have sent a bunch of goons to the New York Times and shut the place down. Trump obviously hasn't done that. Now, true, people will say things like, I forget who it was, I think it was Cher, who goes, he kicked the shit out of me on Twitter. But real brown shirts don't kick the shit out of you on Twitter. They actually kick the shit out of you, period. The reason fascism is not authoritarianism is because authoritarianism has been with us since the dawn of mankind. We have had authoritarian dictators stretching back to the time of the ancient Greeks and perhaps even before that. Fascism is an ideology. So let's spend a moment thinking about it and asking what it is. The term fascism, by the way, comes from the term referring to a bundle of sticks held together, bound together by a kind of cord. In other words, fascism refers to people stuck tightly together, committed to a singular enterprise. That's the meaning of fascism. The first fascists were not Germans, they were Italians, because the first fascist regime in the world was Mussolini, 1922. This is 11 years before Hitler comes to power. And fascist movements develop in Germany, in England, in France, and in Italy, mainly in Italy. If you look at the founders of fascism, all of them, without exception, are men of the left. Mussolini is a famous Marxist. In fact, along with Gramsci, the most famous Marxist in Italy. Mussolini is known to Lenin When Mussolini founds the fascist party, he gets a telegram of congratulations from Lenin to a fellow revolutionary of the left.
Wow.
Hitler, as we know, was a National Socialist. People say, well, come on, didn't Hitler just sort of say he was a National Socialist? Was he really a socialist? So, in other words, we now have this strange phenomenon of the progressives in the West, in America, trying to extract the socialism out of National Socialism, leaving only the nationalism. But the Nazis campaigned on what they call the 25-point platform. Very interesting. We live in a wonderful era where you can check this stuff out. What were the 25 points of the Nazi platform? So you can look it up, and very easily you will see, and it's actually really funny to see today, because this, if you took the Nazi 25-point platform, just crossed out the antiquated word usury, and replaced it with interest, cross out the word Jew, and write in the word the top 1%, right? And then read the Nazi 25-point platform at the Democratic National Convention, I would predict uninterrupted applause. Uninterrupted applause.
Whoa.
Right? It literally reads like it was drafted by a committee made up of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders.
Oh.
As if they wrote it together.
Whoa.
Now, when the Nazis come to power, they implement this platform. There's a very interesting book by the German historian Götz Ali, and he raises a question that no one seems to have asked. Why did the Germans stick with Hitler to the bitter end? Why did they stay and defend him and hang with him until the last stone had been obliterated? What explains the fanatical loyalty of the German people through a devastating war with all its casualties? And Ali answers, it's because the whole of Nazism was a grand socialist piracy scheme. The basic idea was you loot these other countries and you loot the Jews, and you throw them out of office, and you push them out of the professions, and then you steal their art treasures, and you take the land of the Poles and the Latvians and the Eastern Europeans, and you establish the most comfortable, entitlement-based welfare state that the world has ever had. And this is what the Nazis actually did, and this is what they said they were doing. Ali quotes Goebbels, and Goebbels says, we are National Socialists, but which is more important to us, the nationalism or the socialism? And Goebbels says, the socialism.
Whoa.
The national is the adjective, but the socialist is the noun. That's who we are. So this is the actual legacy of Nazism. The Nazis also had an idea that they called Gleichschaltung, and Gleichschaltung basically means coordination, literally. But what it refers to is, let's get all the cultural institutions of society to play to the same tune. In other words, enforced social and cultural conformity. If you think about the meaning of, if you walked in Berlin in the 30s, you would see all kinds of families just unfurl over their balcony windows the swastika flag. Or every time you find two Germans meet, they go, Heil Hitler! Interesting question, worth asking. What does that actually mean? Hitler's not around. Why are you doing Heil Hitler? What's the point of that? Well, the point of that is to signal, I am an obedient German. I am someone who's not going to make trouble. I am in line with the prevailing ideology. I am, to use our term, politically correct. Politically correct. And the Nazis enforce this cultural conformity in the media, in the universities, in the film industry, and so on. Gleichschaltung. We have it in America today. And the true meaning of Nazism wasn't the brown shirts. I mean, the brown shirts were basically a lot of them maladjusted, somewhat confused, some of them semi-psychotic imbeciles. And that's why people ask me, they say, are you scared of Antifa? I'm like, no, it's the same thing. Antifa is made up of imbeciles. These are people who climb out of mom's basement, put on the black outfit, get to go look for their bike lock. This is not actually scary. I'm much more scared of the mayor of Berkeley.
Yes.
Who's a member of the Antifa face crew. He's the guy who tells the cops to step back.
Yep.
I'm much more afraid of the Hollywood bosses who will destroy your career if you fall out of line ideologically, or at Google, if you write a memo, you'll find yourself on the street, or powerful academic deans who control billions of dollars in endowments and who can take the career of a young academic and squash him like a bug, or the people who can use the weapons of the state against their political opponents. Mm-hmm. I have a little experience with this, having had my skirmish with the Obama administration.
Yes.
Now, not to go into all that, but basically, here's the deal. I gave $20,000 of my own money to a college friend of mine running for the Senate. But this was at the time I made the movie about Obama, 2016. And people say, well, Dinesh, what makes you think Obama cared about your stupid movie? Well, the reason I think so is because around the time the movie came out, daily vituperative attacks on the movie began to appear on a website called BarackObama.com. That's kind of why I suspect that Obama was behind it. And literally weeks later, the FBI comes banging on my door. And I discover that I am in really serious trouble. I have to go get one of the best attorneys in New York. The FBI assigns multiple agents to my case.
What? One
of them is assigned merely to read my books, another one to get all my bank statements, a third one to review all my tax returns. They are out to get me. And it's the force of the Justice Department. It's a very funny feeling, particularly for someone like me who's an immigrant. To have United States of America versus Dinesh D'Souza. Now, fast forward to now, and the Congressional Oversight Committee it took them more than a year to get my file. Inside my file, we find that Dinesh D'Souza, red flagged, prominent critic of the Obama administration in my FBI file.
Wow.
And the FBI goes, this is a $20,000 offense. Let's make an initial allocation of $100,000 to investigate the case. $100,000 is deployed to investigate a $20,000 offense. And my case, interestingly, involves no corruption, even alleged. In other words, I make this contribution, but the candidate I'm giving to doesn't even know I did it. And obviously I wasn't asking for anything in return. And the whole point of the campaign finance laws is to prevent that quid pro quo. I'll give you the money if you put me on the court. I'll give you the money if you give my business a tax break. That's the kind of thing the campaign finance laws are for. Now, the only reason I mention this is my little tiny case is sitting alongside this big FBI thing that's going on right now. And the point I want to make is that gets us much closer to the meaning of fascism. By that I mean deploying the weapons of the government. The CIA, the IRS, the FBI, the Justice Department, the EPA. We live at a time where even the post office has a SWAT team. So does the Bureau of Land Management. So today they don't show up at your house like 4 guys in suits with a folder. Today they show up with multiple cars, with weapons, they surround you, they have automatic weapons on you, and there's a helicopter flying over your house. And this is America. Now, I've said a couple things about fascism. I think enough to raise the question of whether fascism is left or right. What I'm suggesting is that fascism has always been on the left, has been recognized to be on the left, both by the fascists and the anti-fascists. And the whole notion that fascism is right-wing is an invention of progressivism post-World War II. What I mean by this is that after World War II, when the concentration camps were liberated and the ghostly emaciated prisoners came stumbling out and fascism and Nazism were totally discredited.
Thank God.
This is when the progressives coming to power in academia, in the media, in Hollywood, who knew the deep connections between progressivism and fascism. They basically said, we have to cover this up. There is no way we want the next generation to find out that we, by we here I mean the progressives and the Democratic Party, have been in bed with Mussolini's fascism and to a lesser degree with Hitler's Nazism, early Nazism. We have to bury this completely. I'll just give you one more example of what I mean when I say these things, because they have been, for me, a kind of a revelation. A few years ago, the Yale legal scholar James Whitman published a very interesting book. It's called Hitler's American Model. Hitler's American Model. I'm like, Hitler's American Model? What are you talking about? The book begins with an opening scene in which a whole group of Nazis are in a room drafting the Nuremberg laws, the laws that make Jews into second-class citizens. And the Nazis think that it's a momentous occasion. They have a stenographer there, and one of the Nazis say, we are creating the world's first racist state. They're super proud. And then one of the Nazis raises his hand and says, in effect sheepishly, he says, we can't create the world's first racist state because the Democratic Party in the United States has already beaten us to the punch. End quote. My paraphrase. And the Nazis are like, what? And this guy says, no, I studied it in Arkansas, in the Jim Crow South, the Democratic Party. And by the way, you have to listen to the voice here because we balk when we hear the Democratic Party. What are you talking about? Are we talking about Southern segregation? Wait, every segregation law in the South was passed by a Democratic legislature, signed by a Democratic governor,
Yes.
and enforced by Democratic officials.
Yes.
There is no exception to this rule. And yet, this simple, crushing fact is in no textbook. It's in not a single textbook or popular account or article, even though it is manifestly irrefutable. And by the way, this is a pattern. A pattern. Last year in my movie Hillary's America, I made the following statement. I said in 1860, the year before the Civil War, no Republican owned a slave. Not no Republican leader owned a slave, but no Republican owned a slave, period. The reason I made that statement was because I'd go from campus to campus, and all kinds of professors of sociology and Romance languages would stand up and say, Dinesh, what you're saying is a little simple-minded because you have to realize there's a lot of blame to go around. There are two parties and there was clearly a lot of guilt. So I thought, you know what? Let me take on this squid-like cloud of blubbery rhetoric and cut it by making a strong generalization that has the beauty of being a kind of scientific statement, in the sense that it's refutable. It's refutable. All you have to do is give me the names of 5 Republicans who owned slaves, and I'd have to take it back. But to this date, not a single valid counterexample has ever been given. One guy wrote me after months of research, and he goes, I got you, Dinesh, I got you. Ulysses S. Grant inherited a solitary slave on his wife's side. And I said, nice try, pal, but at the time that happened, Ulysses S. Grant was a Democrat. To the Republican Party. So we have to pause here for a moment because we have to sort of digest what's happening. What's happening is we have been given, we hear a lot about fake news. Fake news. Fake news is not that big a deal.
Fake history.
And by that I mean, fake news is, you may call it, the small lie. The reason I call my last book The Big Lie, a phrase, by the way, lifted from Hitler, and Hitler says that small lies are kind of easy to catch. Because if somebody makes a small lie, you're in a position to verify it. Your wife is cheating on you with another man. Where's the evidence? Okay, here are the photographs. Small lie, boom. Fascism is a phenomenon of the right. Now that's a different kind of lie, because the person to whom it's told has no immediate ability to refute it. So that's Hitler's point. A big lie is so big, it encompasses so many facts, that you can't get your head around it. And Hitler's point is, big lies are much easier to sell than small lies. You can con very intelligent people into believing a big lie. So when I take on these big lies, I'm in a little bit of a strange position because I'm saying things, and in some ways I almost have to catch myself by saying, wait a minute, if what I'm saying is true, why is it that I can't read it anywhere? Why is it that no book seems to say the same thing? Am I lying? Is there massive counter evidence against my position that I'm somehow withholding or concealing? And the answer is no. I'm concealing nothing. I try to take into account the strongest counter arguments to my own position, and I freely admit them in my books. So we're dealing with a phenomenon that itself demands to be explained, which is, I would call it not fake news, but you could say fake history, fake scholarship.
Yes.
We're talking now not about narratives, but sort of meta-narratives. They're the story behind the story. Now, talk a little bit about fascism. I want to pivot to race, and then I want to open the door to discussion and questions. But the race debate is very, very strange. The Democratic Party has been the party of bigotry from the beginning of American history. All the horrors of American history that we can recite in the area of race, almost without exception, are perpetrated